Does anybody, I know Michael's done some of Mr. Zan's announcements. Anybody else, want to do one?
Mm-hmm.
Which one?
My paternity
All
brother.
right.
Let Michael plug in.
I'm trying.
I know. Not a problem. What's that?
The bridge.
Oh, really? Wow.
I'm pretty sure I went over it and they're hammering. They're pretty good.
Huh. Okay. So let's call the January 3rd, 2023 Charlottesville City Council meeting to order. Ms. Thomas, will you call the roll, please?
Councilor McGill,
Present.
Councilor Payne,
Here.
Councilor Pinkston,
Here.
Mayor Snook,
Here?
Vice Mayor Wade.
Here.
All right. Is there a motion to approve or amend the agenda?
Yeah, I'd like to amend the agenda. Help me out here. I think item 8, we want to take off the agenda,
Critical
The
slope waiver.
The consent agenda.
off the consent agenda,
Yeah.
sorry.
And are we intending to take that up on the action items then?
Yes, I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay.
So number 8 on the consent agenda goes to the action items, would be my motion. And then,
It would go to the end after the resolution about the TJPDC allocation plan.
okay, and then I would say the same for item 5 on the consent agenda unless we're through arguing about it.
I'm in support of that for further discussion, but
To move it off consent?
yeah.
Okay. All right. So we'll move number 5 and number 8, and we will put them after what is currently number 14. Okay, so we have a motion. Michael, you second?
Yes, second.
Okay. All in favor of amending the agenda, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, that is approved. Motion, I guess we've amended the agenda. Now we have to pass the amended agenda. Is that right, Ms. Thomas? Could you call?
That could possibly have served as approving the agenda with
Okay.
amendments.
That's the common sense approach, but
Yeah.
every now and then, you know how us lawyers get.
Okay.
Okay, so let's figure that we've now accomplished that objective. So this meeting will be divided into 3 sections. First is a work session to hear and discuss presentations that do not require a council vote. Then there will be a closed meeting, and then the city council business meeting, which will begin around 6:30 with seating available in council chambers for up to 23 pre-registered attendees and media. Others are able to join electronically by Zoom. That typically begins around 6:30. So on the 4 o'clock agenda, we have move to health equity, and Mr. Sanders, are you starting this thing off?
Yes, sir. Counselors, this evening you all have a presentation. I'm just going to simply turn it over to Peter Krebs. We had heard about this briefly during one of the Planning Commission meetings towards the end of last year. And Peter reached out about being able to bring the survey results from the 2021 Move to Health Equity Community Mobility Survey to you all. This fits within our ongoing conversation to staff as it relates to transportation planning across our city. And there's definitely more work that we need to do. Bicycle ped specifically is one of our focus areas at the moment. And you even have an item later today with your new transportation planner. So it's all fitting that we kick off the year talking about transportation, and there's a lot more to come. So Peter, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Sam. I'm going to pass it right over to Jackie Martin, if that's okay.
Hi, thank you, Peter. I'm Jackie Martin. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Move to Health Equity Coalition, and I'm also a UVA Health employee in the Office of Diversity and Community Engagement. So first, I'd like to really quickly tell you a little bit about the Move to Health Equity Coalition. We started as a community action on obesity well over 20 years ago, before people were really talking about obesity as a chronic disease. We've transformed over the years to not just look at obesity or any chronic disease in general, but to go more upstream to look and focus on some of the root causes of some of the inequities in our communities. So tonight you're going to hear a project that Peter Krebs worked on. He is a member of our active community action team. We have 4 action teams: access to healthcare, active communities, healthy food systems, and healthy spaces. And at this point, I'll turn it over to the other co-chair, Greg Winston, who's going to introduce Peter.
Thank you. Mr. Winston?
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you the work that the coalition has been doing over the past year. It's been a tremendous effort with COVID and trying to get this survey done, but through sheer tenacity and persistence, Peter and his team worked through that. And the report that they have produced is, I think, something that will be useful as we talk about how do we address these things as we go forward. So I'd like to introduce Peter Krebs, who will present the report. Peter?
Thank you both, and thank you both especially for coming out on an afternoon. I know that you're busy and have a lot going on, and I appreciate it, and I think the community will benefit from what we have to share tonight. So my name is Peter Krebs. I work for the Piedmont Environmental Council. PUC is part of the Move to Health Equity Coalition, which Jackie or Greg could chime in, but there must be something like 40 organizations that are a part of this group. And, you know, there's some pretty major organizations that are part of this coalition. So like both hospitals, the health department, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club, a lot of household names, but also some passionate individuals and neighborhood groups. So I'm just really, it's easy for me to show up to do my work with all these super inspiring people around me. If it's okay with you all, I will share my screen and we'll do a quick presentation of the results of the mobility survey. As you can probably see, there's a lot to this report, and I'm not going to go into every detail. In fact, I'm going to move very quickly, but there'll be time for questions, and also the report itself is available. So, can everyone see my screen okay?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. Okay. So first, a quick summary of what we're going to talk about. We'll give background why we're doing this survey, We'll talk a little bit about the methods, although that could talk all night. I'm going to fly through the methods section. And part of that is a little bit about who responded, which is really important. We'll talk about what they said and some quick recommendations. And so here we go. But first I have to start by saying that although I'm the one that's presenting here, it's not the case that this is solely my work or even mostly my work. This is the product of many, many people who have worked, hard for more than a year. And so, this belongs to all of them and to the whole community as well. Also, I think it's important to mention that the survey itself was made possible with a grant from Sentara Martha Jefferson Hospital. So thank you, Sentara, and for all the teammates who made this happen. So as Jackie and Greg both talked about, we're about getting ahead of the social determinants of health. And in my case, I'm the head of the Active Communities team. And the way Move to Health Equity basically works is we're independent organizations that share a lot of overlapping goals. And we work together in those areas of overlap where we can accomplish more by working together rather than working alone. We employ a collective impact model, which is a very structured way for groups to share their resources. And we, as far as implementation of our work, we use a strategic doing approach where if we can't solve the big problems, we chop off small problems and knock them out one by one and build a momentum going forward. So during the peak of COVID-19, which was when the survey happened, we couldn't do a lot of our usual tabling and getting out in the public. So we did some sort of little bit behind the scenes research and took the opportunity to just to do research and to learn more to make sure we're on the right track. And you'll hear a theme throughout that listening and learning is not something we do every 5 years. It's something that we're constantly doing and constantly growing. So these data that I'm going to present tonight are just one look. And Sam mentioned the ongoing efforts to improve transportation in the city of Charlottesville. This is one piece of that. It's not the answer, but it has some interesting good answers. So they already talked about our work groups and that we were not able to check our work and to make sure that we're on the right track. But it's not happening now by accident. So Charlottesville's comprehensive plan talks a lot about walking and biking and transit and getting around, but it doesn't provide precise answers about how to do that. So the purpose of this survey is to provide some answers and some ideas about what a better connected community might look like. The survey itself happened in the spring and summer of 2021. For almost the entire duration of that time frame, COVID restrictions were in place, and at the time we had no idea when or if they would be lifted. So we worked primarily digitally. The survey has 15 questions. It's a very tactile survey that's designed to be used on a phone or a mobile device. It was in English and Spanish, and we received just under 430 responses. Our primary means of distribution for the survey was the city's network of neighborhood associations combined with the Move to Health Equity's very large reach and numerous organizations, and also the network of neighborhood leaders that exist throughout the city. So there are many types of neighborhood leaders in Charlottesville, not just the neighborhood association. We had flyers all over town. We had posters in every CAP bus. And happily, toward the end of the survey, we were able to get to 2 in-person events, and those were very fruitful and productive. Just a partial list of the groups that assisted with distribution. So although the sample size is in the hundreds, we worked with numerous groups, and probably if we did it now, the network would be even larger. We were able to hear back from every neighborhood except for one, and that one that we didn't hear back from is Barracks Road. And Barracks Road's a bit unique as a neighborhood in the sense that it's not heavily residential. But I'm going to talk about some of the other characteristics that were interesting. I noticed that not all the neighborhoods responded equally, and this is no surprise, and I'll talk more about the implications of that in a minute, and recommended next steps that result from that. One thing that was interesting that we encountered is some of the neighborhoods that responded the most were those that were very active in discussions about the future land use map, which was also happening at the time. And so we've seen this pattern in all kinds of work where neighborhoods that have something to be upset about are more likely to chime in about the city's plan. And so if we did the survey now instead of in 2021, I think a different group of neighborhoods would be responding back. For example, we might be hearing from Woolen Mills a lot more than we did because there's that controversial development project there. But going forward, this this grid also shows us where the future work and more intensive community outreach needs to happen. As far as age, there is a broad distribution. It's a normal looking bell curve. However, Charlottesville doesn't have a normal looking distribution of ages because of the large student population. Interesting that we did not hear from UVA students as much as we might have liked. And that signal also came through with that Barracks Road low response rate,
And no kids.
for example. Good response from women, which is great because women are a priority community. Systems and solutions that work for women very often work for men. So that's why, at least in my own approach, I try to find solutions that work for women. It is, as far as racial distribution, the response was much wider than the population of Charlottesville. This is, again, not a huge surprise. It's something we see across our planning efforts. And I think that it's clear where the future work and future conversations have to happen. And again, this is why I'm so excited about getting out of a virtual world into a more on-the-ground community type approach for our future work. Similar story for education. Again, the respondents have a higher degree of education than the typical Charlottesville resident. That could be better if you allow for the fact that we have a lot of students in Charlottesville that have not yet attained their college degree, or it might be considered worse because, oh my gosh, we have an overeducated survey response, and this doesn't even include the students. So again, clear where we need to do better in the future. And, you know, I'm sorry if it seems like I'm being highly critical or whatever throughout this process, but I think folks that are familiar with my work and with the Move to Health Equity, we're very about accountability and about keeping things very real with our work. But what we I think the takeaways from the limitations that we do have is that we do have to get back on the ground. And now that COVID's over, that's a much more possible thing. These results might be a little bit different than normal because of COVID. We need to take that with a grain of salt. We need to be very focused on follow-up and focus on priority communities. And I also think that there's good opportunities to focus in the future on collaborating with Albemarle County and UVA. This work product, however, is only about Charlottesville, which is why I'm here tonight. So here's what respondents said. And again, we're all about multiple ways of learning and listening. So I don't think anything you're going to hear tonight is going to come as a huge surprise. But it's pretty interesting to see it starkly in graphs. First of all, most residents drive to get around. A decent number also walk regularly. Bicycle usage is interesting because looking at this graph, it seems like, oh, it's about halfway, but it's not the case that half of Charlottesville residents use the bicycle for transportation. When we look deeper at the data, it turns out that there are a small number of cyclists who use their bikes a lot for transportation, and then a large number of people who use them seldom for transportation. Transit taxis and shared mobility were all not very much used. And again, remember, this is during COVID. Contrast how people get around to what they said when we asked how they would like to get around. When we asked people how they would like to get around, the answer was overwhelmingly by bicycle, walking, or by transportation. Quite a few people prefer to still drive, but to the extent that the comprehensive plan says that Charlottesville residents would like a more walkable, connected community, I think this survey data really backs that up. So that's good to see we're on the right track that way. When we asked them what's the easiest destination to reach, interestingly, or rather the question was, how easy is it to get to each of these destinations on a scale from 1 at the low end to 5 at the top? Work was the easiest place for people to get. And healthcare, schools, food, and shopping were significantly more difficult for people to reach, which I think gets to that question of what are we planning for? What kind of transportation system are we working toward? When we took another different type of look at the data, instead of looking at the mean, looking at the spread of the responses, we found that not only was work relatively easy to get to, it was relatively easy to get to for almost everybody with a low standard deviation. But where you see disparities is with these higher numbers, healthcare, food, school. I wouldn't worry about this church and worship number because I think a lot of people simply said they don't go to church and put that as a 0. But it is very concerning for Move to Health Equity Coalition to see that it's difficult and there are disparities when it comes to reaching food and healthcare. Access to jobs was decent when we looked at all the different neighborhoods. One of the strengths of the survey is we broke it out by neighborhood. But some of the more core neighborhoods, historically Black neighborhoods specifically, reported that it's more difficult for them to get to food resources as well as healthcare. This is a concern. We asked people similar questions in a multitude of ways. And so, for example, we gave them the opportunity to just tell us in their own words what they would like to be better for transportation. And out of 400 respondents, 92 of them talked about getting to groceries and shopping areas. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in any of my research, where unprovoked, nearly a quarter of the survey respondents say they want something. I think this is something that needs to be taken seriously. Also note that 18 of them, again, unsolicited, said that getting to healthcare resources is a problem. That's a problem for all of us. When we ask them what's keeping them from having the type of connected community they would like to have, again, no huge surprise there. People talked about lack of sidewalks, lack of bike lanes, buses not running frequently enough, and concerns about being injured by cars or crosswalks not feeling safe, and a not unexpected number also talked about traffic and parking. We'll get more into parking in a little bit. So broken out by neighborhoods, we saw, again, some disparities that were interesting and not necessarily the same. So broken out by neighborhood, some of the neighborhoods that are sort of inner suburbs that have been absorbed into the city. So that would include like Belmont or Martha Jefferson or I don't know, JPA, neighborhoods like that. They are from an era when cities were meant to be walkable, but the infrastructure was never there to make it happen. Similar case in Fikeville. You really want to walk around there, but the sidewalks are very discontinuous. They sort of stop at one property line and resume maybe across the street somewhere else. So getting continuity in these older neighborhoods is going to be really important. Again, given the chance to elaborate, people's concerns were very familiar. They talked about safety. They talked about lack of proper infrastructure. Some folks talked about parking becoming a problem for them, and especially for older folks and folks with disabilities. When we ask people to identify spatially where the problems existed, and then we mapped it, it looks like, well, it's a map of the whole city, right? Like problems everywhere. Remember, this is a neighborhood survey, so it's quite understandable that people would talk about problems in their neighborhood. And this is what we wanted. We got good data. When we normalized the number of responses about a given location against the number of people who live near that location, we did actually see some patterns that were rather interesting. So these are the top 10 areas where people expressed concern. And then we divided it by the number of people who live close to that. So, for example, US 29 was our highest source of complaint, no surprise there. But not many people, at least within the context of the city of Charlottesville, live on 29. Yet lots of people are talking about it. We can see from this that 29 and hydraulic is a real problem that transcends just neighborhood concern and also affects everybody. Looking at the commonality between these sort of hot areas of concern, what they have in common is that they're commuter routes. And that, again, sort of jives with what we were hearing from people in their free responses. they're afraid to cross the street. I was a bit surprised to see the Avon corridor be on that list because Avon is a little street. But then thinking back last year when the schools were talking about expanding the walk zones and what it would take to make it be safer, Avon Street came up a lot. And so I think what we can infer from this is that commuter routes are a problem for commuters. Transportation planners have known this for half a century, but these commuter routes are also a problem for the neighborhoods they cross, and that they create the perception or the reality of being unsafe places to be or to cross. The survey did happen during COVID-19, so we took the opportunity to ask a few questions about COVID. But I think we kind of asked the wrong questions, so I'm not going to go into it too much. We asked whether they thought COVID would change their transportation choices. And it turns out that no, they didn't think it had changed or would change their mode choice. What I wish we had asked is if the way they use transportation had changed, like are people commuting more or less? 2020 hindsight. But the story is very different for transit users. There was a big impact of COVID-19 on transit users. I think everybody in the room can attest to how dramatically transportation was affected by COVID. And at the time, the users were concerned that it would stay disrupted. And so this is something I think that we have to pay close attention to in the next couple of years. Again, we also asked about hours worked outside the home, but we kind of asked the question in the wrong way, just being honest. We asked how many hours they work outside of home. And if you think about it in the COVID world, what does it mean to work outside of home? Does that mean working from home? We allowed people to include hobbies and volunteer work and other things that necessitate transportation. So this question, frankly, didn't work that well. But one thing that I think was very interesting and worth paying attention to is that the story is different between women and men. And remember, we had that nice representation from women. So I think we can start to draw some conclusions. Notice that a lot more women than men were working outside of the home at that time. And I think this is something that we need to be watching closely going forward. We saved this data and we can digest it in a lot of different ways if that's of interest. And finally, we closed the survey with open-ended suggestions and with their open-ended suggestions. We summarized them for you in a couple of different categories. First of all, residents overwhelmingly would like to be able to walk and bike more easily, with emphasis on consistency and the removal of obstructions, better crosswalks, better maintenance, better signage. I think it's worth noting, thanks to Sam for this good introduction, that the city is indeed working on crosswalks and signage and those things. Thanks in part to the school district. And I think this validates that they're on the right track. You got to slow down the vehicles. And especially over and over, people talked about there being obstructions in sidewalks that render the sidewalks that we have difficult or impassable. For transit to be effective and practical, it needs to be more frequent with fewer transfers. Right now, riding the bus just takes too long, I think across the board. And also improving the bus waiting experience. And a large number of people also asked for an electrified bus fleet. People also talked about driving And several people were very adamant that not everybody ever wants to walk and bike, and I think that needs to be always taken into consideration and factored. There were quite a few people asking for more parking and quite a few people asking for less parking, but I think there was unanimity in having more parking for elders and folks with disabilities, support for e-bikes and electric vehicles. And then also just a lot of good responses talking about how it's important to focus on historically Black and historically excluded communities, systems that work for elders and the young work for everybody. And also, while we're doing this work, we really need to be cognizant of what's happening across the line in Albemarle County. Our recommendations to you are to pair the comp plan with a mobility plan that focuses on safe routes to school, food, and healthcare. Neighborhood focus, being connected, overcomes disconnectivities and discontinuities, and is cognizant of Albemarle County, timely and measurable. We need to get the basics right. Correct sidewalks, correct curb ramps, removing obstructions, and continuous safe routes, and then a more practical transit system. A number of you are very focused on the regional transit vision plan, Move to Health Equity, supports the unconstrained transit vision plan, and that unconstrained vision isn't going to happen tomorrow. And in between now and then, we should do what we can to improve frequency of service to food, retail, and healthcare. Our next steps as a group are to report back to decision makers. I guess I can cross that off the list. Follow up with the many neighborhood partners that helped us learn this excellent information. No surprise to you, advocating for more funding, staffing, and quick builds to get these crosswalks and sidewalks fixed. Getting back into the field, we're super excited about that. The community health plan process, the periodic update happens again in just a few weeks, so we're gearing up for that. And also, PEC is sponsoring our third annual Piedmont Mobility Summit in February at City Space. So that's all I have. I'm happy to do whatever else you would like me to do at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Krebs. Are we going to have other reports from our other participants here, or what's the plan?
I believe that this is the only report scheduled.
Okay. Well, if anybody else, whether or not you're scheduled to make a report, if either of you all would like to make a comment, I'm happy to hear from you at this point. Mr. Winston or Ms. Martin?
No, and thank you. I think that, we stand behind the work that our action team has done. Peter and his team did an amazing job of digging in and getting into stuff, and I think it's provided us with information we can work on for the next couple of years. And we wanted to solicit the support of the Charlottesville City Council to be partners with us in this endeavor as we go forward.
Okay. The one thing I would say is we don't have a copy of that presentation, do we?
It's in the agenda.
It's in the packet.
Or sorry, the full report is, but not the PowerPoint slides.
Okay.
Happy to share those.
Oh, okay. That's right. I see it here, yes.
And I'm going to post a link to the report in the chat. So hopefully you and anyone that can see the chat can do that as well.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. Councilors have any questions, comments?
Yes, this is a great report. Thank you. It's very helpful. I think it resonates with what we've been hearing from others in the community. I'm interested. I think one of your recommendations was to have a mobility plan connected with the comprehensive plan. Is the notion there something similar to what we're doing with the climate plan? Can you say a little more about that? Perhaps you or Mr. Sanders?
So what I can say, this is something that will be a city-led initiative, so I'll absolutely defer to Sam, but the whole thing is built to work together. So the Climate Action Plan does also mention a mobility plan, and that's something that has changed in process. Some people talk about a transportation plan. Our communications with the city led us to think that actually it's more of a mobility, broadly speaking, plan rather than a simple transportation plan.
Okay. Is Mr. Sanders available?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So I know that you and your staff have reams and reams of, lists and lists of sidewalks that need to be fixed, and you're prioritizing, you're in a process of doing prioritization and assigning the correct funds to meet those needs. How does that intersect with a mobility plan per se?
What I would say to that right now is that we are in the very, very early stages of the transportation plan and really wrapping his arms around all the various plans that we have.
Okay.
Peter's shaking his head that they're a very disparate set of plans because we've done them at different times with different motivations, and they're not connected. Part of the work that Ben will undertake is actually to try to digest and organize some of that material, putting it together in what we hope will then become a set of strategies for going forward. Whether it turns out to be a mobility plan or something similar to what I imagined, in my mind, I'm imagining what Peter is suggesting. I think we're headed there. We're not there at this time because Ben has just started, so he has a little bit of catch-up work to do in trying to figure out what are the various plans that we have. We do have a lot of federal funds that are driving a lot of interest and actions. So some of that is important for us to settle on rather quickly so that we'll know how to pursue some of these additional opportunities. One of them could very easily be elevating that suggestion into more of a document, a robust way of connecting all the different plans and highlighting and picking and choosing the various top strategies out of each one of them so that we have some path forward.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yes.
If I might add, Councillor Pinkston, you didn't ask directly, but I kind of inferred in the question. So we've heard, for example, about Jack Dawson's prioritization, like an algorithmic approach, and we definitely support that. That would be integrated, and I know it's not something that will stand alone. It's something that the whole transportation and even the whole planning team are going to work in a very integrated way.
Thank you. I think this is great, and I support your recommendations. I just had a few kind of follow-up questions or comments, and one is particularly about the walking and the sidewalks. And I love walking, and the missus and I just kind of went walking yesterday in the 10th and Page neighborhood, and it is one of those neighborhoods, particularly with a lot of uneven sidewalks. And I've been over the years walking with different people and took some pretty bad spills because of the uneven sidewalks, with the trees buckling them up, and they'll come in and sand them down, but it's still kind of uneven, and there's some pretty bad spots. And I think that one way that we can get input is just have the planners or staff to actually go out when people are walking and ask them, and not necessarily rely 100% on surveys and things, because a lot of times they may not walk or ride the bus or what have you. But just ask people that are actually doing the various things. I think that you'll get some real good nuggets of information then. And also, a part that I didn't see there, but I know that a lot of people are using. I get a lot of complaints about it, but I know a lot of people using that, and that's these scooters. You'll see me walking, and I'm picking them up, that they're falling down, that they leave them in the middle of the sidewalks, but I know a lot of people use them as their transportation. So this is something that we have to get control over in the city, because a lot of times they are left, several of them are left just in a road or on the sidewalks, and if you're in a wheelchair or something and you see that and no one is around, you're just kind of stuck. I'm not sure what happens. I move them when I can, but I wish we could let people know, or the bike makers, or the scooters, or something, let them know that, that this is an issue that I think if we have any say, and this is not necessarily for you all, this is kind of one of Juan's pet peeves at this point now, so that we need to address, because it is, I think, a valuable form of transportation, but it inhibits other forms of transportation. So, but I think this is good. It kind of brought back some memories of my old days doing transportation planning, where we actually had an organization that we started called ACT, which put a lot of different kind of transportation providers together to address these type of issues. And I'm glad to see that this is being done, because Charlottesville is relatively speaking, a walkable city, because we're 10 square miles, and I know it's a lot of hills, but there are a lot of options here. So thank you all very much for your work on this.
Questions down at this end, comments?
A couple questions. One, I know it came up a couple times in your report, the areas that are basically in the urban ring of Charlottesville and Albemarle. I know that Albemarle is working on some comprehensive plan updates at the moment. Do you feel like the work you've done with this in Charlottesville is able to plug in well in parallel with what they're doing there? Because obviously, we can't really be successful in the urban ring without action from Albemarle as well.
In some ways, yes. I think that the responses are ones that would resonate with Albemarle's urban residents, but at the same time, I think they ought to have their own say as well. So some utility for them, maybe it's good questions to start with. So for example, this issue of obstructions on the sidewalk, I think that's something that they can put into their top level of research, like rather than discovering, obstacles make it impossible to live with dignity. Just start with that as a presupposition, and so then they can build on the work in that way.
Another question. You mentioned quick builds. We've talked about it plenty, but in the more immediate term, I think our biggest goal for city government is getting the project managers in place to kind of get through the existing backlog. But quick builds are maybe something more immediately that can be done. Do you have any examples of kind of what some of those would be, or have you identified any specific quick builds that maybe could be like a first priority for taking action on?
Well, I think one that's been quite successful actually is the hiring of crossing guards. So in some ways, maybe adding a crossing guard to an intersection would do more than getting the hard infrastructure right in terms of making it feel safer. So I think that's a great example, or flex posts to create a shorter crossing distance. And I mean, I think an ambitious plan would be to try some stuff on Fifth Street, not only to make it easier to cross, but to slow the vehicles down. I guess those are just some examples. Also, West Main Street, I think there's a proposal to go ahead and do what we can with planters and paint while we're waiting for figuring out how to put together the multi-piece Humpty Dumpty that is the West Main Streetscape.
Yeah. Curious, just more informally in talking to people about biking, I hear fairly frequently that one of the barriers people have to start biking is just the fear of traffic, obviously, and one of the barriers is a lack of protected bike lanes in the city. Is that something you picked up in this work as one of the barriers for biking, or is it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That would be, if I could name 5 things that people asked for, protected bike lanes would probably be one of them, along with better crosswalks, fewer sidewalk obstructions. So I'd say it's a first level priority for residents. And that might be something that can be done with some of these quick build scenarios.
Yeah, and it's a little left field, but I'm curious. I've never been able to quite figure it out. Like, what are the barriers to protected bike lane construction in Charlottesville and Virginia? Because it seems like it often doesn't end up part of a smart scale project or other improvements. Are there particular things kind of driving that?
So we have Sam Sanders on the call. I'm sure he could say a lot more than me, but I think from my perspective as just a transportation planner and advocate, I think what's unique in Virginia is legacy property lines, so there's an acquisition issue. We have utilities, some of which are active, some are disused that are a real mess. We don't have the sort of clean slate that a lot of other places have to work with. And then even when something looks like a clean slate, sometimes the challenges are hidden. So thinking about the Franklin Street Sidewalk project, for example, if you look at it as a novice, and maybe that was me when I first encountered that project, it seemed like, well, what's the problem? There's lots of space, there are not even trees or power lines in the way. But, water management, hidden utilities, we're trying to do this work inside a bowl of spaghetti in some ways.
Yeah, I wonder if that almost requires changes on VDOT on smart scales end at some point. But anyway, that's another conversation. And just one final question. It's kind of bigger picture, but I think it's really important that you highlighted the disparities in neighborhood response rates and that the response rates weren't reflective of the entire community. I know that's been a perennial challenge in a lot of areas, particularly in bike ped advocacy. It's a big picture question and there's not any easy answer to, but in this work, would you have any advice for us on kind of how do we avoid falling into the trap of we end up prioritizing projects in a neighborhood in our area we've heard from the most, and that ends up just being the wealthiest neighborhoods that have gotten to us the most, even though it may not be the biggest transportation issue?
Right. So, I acknowledge that I get exist in an advocacy perspective, and I don't have to weigh, the whole city's concerns the way that you all do. But I think it's sort of a question of staying focused, and we know where the need is. It's not like these problems are like newly discovered, but we do have to stay focused on doing work where there is actual public benefit for a large number of people whose lives can be really made better. I mean, we're talking about, for example, making it easier to get to a grocery store. I think ought to weigh more perhaps than having a perfectly visually appealing neighborhood in some other location. I guess that's one way of just saying, like, we need to apply this like a justice and equity lens to everything with the work. And also we should really listen to neighborhood leaders and people on the ground. Sometimes our assumptions from afar, or even based just on a survey, are interesting, but the picture becomes a little bit different when you talk to people on the ground. I think that this issue of obstructions is something that the survey indicates, okay, there could be a concern, but talking to people on the ground really reinforces that. So we need to focus on equitable outcomes, and we need to aggressively collect data in multiple ways. I think those are two approaches.
Yeah, and I know there's no one easy answer there. You know, it's more of a shift in mindset about how we prioritize and make decisions. But those are all the questions I have. I appreciate the presentation and information.
And the only question, I guess, that I have is sort of what's next? You know, getting a lot of information. I know that a lot of folks will have that information available to them, but it sort of seems like it feels like we should be doing something with it. Now I notice Mr. Sanders coming on. Hopefully he's got the answer for us.
I have a little clarity in that this really speaks to the comments that you all heard during the CIP conversation, the Planning Commission. And Councilor Payne just really hit it on the head. It's really about prioritization. We have done a great job as a city determining things that we need to study. We have done a great job of finding the funds to pay for plans. And we've done a great job of being able to figure out what all the various issues are. So that's a good thing. The bad thing is that in some instances, we've taken a plan and basically replaced or diminished the prior plan that was never fully implemented just because we have more current information. And that's, a lot of places do that. So that's not a criticism of Charlottesville, it's just the state of being. But what we have not done previously is that we've not actually had anyone to own this effort, this work. And we now have that. With Ben Chambers stepping in as our new transportation planner, we actually have someone to drive this, literally drive this process forward, because we've only been touching on it and kind of hitting the surface and pulling some things forward, doing a little work as a result of it, which was all good. But now this is a part of someone's day-to-day, figuring out transportation needs for the city as a whole, looking at it from a regional perspective, looking at it through an equity lens, looking at it for gap analyses and various things that we just haven't had the time to do for the approach that we had available to us, with it just being a part of what Public Works is doing, part of what NDS is doing, part of what CAT is doing. This actually gives us some synergy in that we have one person who now is the convener of all these different conversations. We've already had our very first meeting that was about 2 weeks ago. Ben pulled together a transportation cohort. It's all internal staff to begin to kind of plan out how do we do the assessment work for what's on the table today, and then determine what that says to us, what may be needed, and then how do we go forward. I see this as adding material to that conversation. And at some point, there will be further engagement outside of the city itself and having various representatives from the community to help us process some of what the fruits of that work is.
Okay.
And, you know, I don't work for Sam. I can be quite critical of the city, but I think he also has hit the nail on the head about the importance of building a team to actually implement the fruits of those plans. So I think that's what happened in Albemarle County, and they're enjoying some of the benefits. So I really do think you're on a good track getting a team together so we can actually have plans. We know what, certain things we need to do. We even have projects that have been sort of languishing, and getting those unstuck. That's going to be really helpful and important.
Okay. Anything else?
I'll just, underscore what was just said by Mr. Sanders. I've met the new planner, and he seems really sharp. And this is why staffing is so important. We can't do all the things we want to do as a city if we don't have the people in place to do it. And going into this next budget cycle will continue to be a focus for us, that we get the people we need to do the work. So, yeah, I appreciate everything that I've heard tonight. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Mr. Krebs, Ms. Martin, Mr. Winston. Thanks. It's been very educational.
Thank you.
That is all
Thank you.
we've got on our agenda for the 4 o'clock session. So it's probably time for us. We do have some closed session business. Can we get a motion to go into closed session, please?
Sure. Pursuant to Section 2.2-3712 of the Virginia Code, I hereby move that City Council close this open meeting and convene in a closed session as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.2-3711 A1 for the discussion and consideration of appointing members to the following Charlottesville boards and commissions: the Police Civilian Oversight Board.
Second?
All right, is there any discussion of the motion? If not, let's see, all in favor?
Aye.
Yes.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Council is now in closed session. We will return to a separate Zoom link for those of you who are joining us by Zoom for the open meeting at 6:30. So see you in an hour and a half.